This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
Joining me today on Believe in People is my friend Jane Sibbett. She is a talented actress and storyteller, best known for her role in Friends. Jane is multi-talented. She's a writer, producer, director, photographer, advocate, and source conduit, and I'm thrilled that she's joining me today. Grant Faulkner is a passionate advocate for the power of storytelling and creative expression. As the co-founder of 100-Word Story, co-host of the Right-Minded podcast, and executive producer of America's Next Great Author, Grant has dedicated his career to championing writers of all kinds. Grant, welcome to Believe in People.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks, Grant. Okay, I'm going to ask you, when you were a kid, did you think, yep, I want to be a writer?
I did, yeah.
You did?
Even before I knew how to read and write, I have this, one of my first memories is getting this idea for a whole series of books when I was like 3 or 4 and running downstairs to tell my mom all about it. And she was on one of her super long phone calls with her best friend. This was like pre-internet, of course. So the phone was the internet. So I could not get her off the phone to tell her my brilliant idea. And I don't know what it was, but I never got to tell her. But yeah, I knew it was it's interesting because I do think that sometimes it feels genetic, I can't remember a time when I didn't think I was going to be a writer, even though I entertained other career options, of course.
Like what career options?
Oh my gosh. I mean, especially in my 20s, when I was trying to be a writer and make a living at it, and it was just so super hard. And I was like waiting tables and working in bookstores. And I spent a whole decade kind of not knowing how to get a professional job, So, I thought I ended up trying out being a journalist, a teacher, things like that. I think like when I was younger, my father, was a lawyer, and he saved one office in his tiny little, it was a small town lawyer, and he saved it in case my brother or I became lawyers, and neither one of us did. It was this sweet thing. The office was vacant for decades, but it was nice to know it was there, and it was nice to know that I could go to law school and return to my hometown and be a really bad, kooky lawyer, and sort of live off my father's coattails, which would have been a pretty good plan as a writer, actually. Not a bad plan. Yeah. But yeah, so the big moment for me was like I was a sophomore in college, and I had to decide between majors, and I was deciding between an economics major or an English major. And I very fortunately did this study abroad program to France and sat around cafes and read novels and wrote, and never thought about being an econ major again, thank God. Yeah.
What a way to launch. That is so beautiful. I love everyone wants to have that dream of being in Paris.
Well, I thought I'd spend my whole writing career in Paris reading novels in cafes and writing them. It just didn't work out that way. That was supposed to.
Well, perhaps there can be some fabulous retreat coming up. Yeah. Grant, I was just telling Amy that I was introduced to you through Brooke Warner and Right-Minded podcast, and how significant you two have been for my happiness being up here, and not just going through hospice with my mom, but actually just being my companion on my walks where I was trying to get out there in the world. I'm so grateful for your insights and your wisdom. And so whatever you've done to leapfrog where you are, I'm glad you're not in that lawyer office. But I am so grateful for your work out there. And, even before that, I think I heard about you because of NaNoWriMo, too.
Yeah, your daughter did it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, do you know NaNoWriMo?
It's funny because I was introduced to that, I think, within the last 8 months. So, no, please tell me more about it. I really want to know.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Do you want us to tell, Jane? Let me hear your version.
My version is NaNoWriMo is write a novel in a month, which for me was like, because like Grant, I've always wanted to write. That was really my dream. I didn't want to be an actor. I wanted to write. And so to the idea that I could actually get something out or at least form something in a month was exciting. So I pitched it to my daughters. And they thought it was a great idea, particularly one. And then my youngest daughter, Violet, thought it was so great. She pitched it to her teacher. And I think she
Hmm.
was in all of fourth grade. And her
Yeah.
teacher thought it was such a great idea that she said, the class is going to do this. This is what we're going to do as a class. And then she invited Violet to talk in front of the entire school, and the entire school did it. And this was in
My
Hawaii.
gosh.
So
Oh.
everybody was writing a novel in Hawaii. And I think that's the first time I reached out to. I probably wrote you just a little fan letter to NaNoWriMo and just saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. You changed the lives of all these children in Hawaii.
That's a cool name, by the way. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that is like, I'm so glad you told about it, Jane, instead of me, because that was just like such a lovely story. I
It's a
love how,
great
because
story.
that's so NaNoWriMo stands, it's an acronym for National Novel Writing Month, and the challenge is to write 50,000 words in a month. And it's a small nonprofit that has this, wild global reach. And for just the reasons Jane kind of outlined, it's really kind of contagious. One person tells another person about it. The main reason that people joined NaNoWriMo and did it was because a friend invited them to. And the same goes with schools too. So yeah, that's just an amazing story.
Yeah.
Ah,
That's what
that's interesting.
it.
So, I mean, from that, then you're inspiring people to write. And so, from your perspective, what do you think a creative myth is, or what you could, you'd love to debunk about
Hmm.
something that holds people back from believing they can write?
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating because I was executive director for 12 years. I left about a year ago, and so many people, when I told them or invited them to write a novel with us, they'd say, "I'm not a creative type," or "I'm not a writer, I'm not a storyteller." And I was always like, being everyone's a creative type because that's the definition of being human. Maybe the first definition of being human. We're all storytellers. That's how we make meaning in the world. And then oftentimes people, I think, a lot of times, well, I believe that believing in your story is the crucial thing. And if you believe in your story, then you'll be more likely to sit down and write it. You'll be more likely to get through the muddy middle of it. You'll be more likely to revise it, look for an agent, publish it, no matter what it is. Like you got to believe in it. And so I think that that's one thing that I always encourage people to do is to really work on their belief in their story and their belief in themselves, of course. And then I think the other thing is that a lot of people they wait until that perfect time someday in the future to do their creative projects or write their novel. And someday tends not to happen. You have to figure out a way to make it happen today. And that's part of the premise, right? 50,000 words in just a month, set aside 1 month, make creativity a priority, you know. So don't wait for inspiration because you create inspiration by sitting down and writing.
And you do that all the time. And you've got
Yeah.
groups, and you're working on some new endeavors right now, aren't you?
Got some new writing endeavors. Yeah. So I'm executive producer on this hopefully upcoming TV show, America's Next Great Author. I've been working on that about 5 years, and we just signed a deal with Canopy with a K.
Great.
They're kind of like
Yeah,
Netflix for libraries. So if you have a
yeah.
library card, it's likely that your library subscribes to Canopy. They have a wonderful like catalog of movies already, but they're now investing in original content. So we're working with them. And then Brooke and I are working on this organization called Memoir Nation. And the premise of it is kind of like National Novel Writing Month, except instead of novels, it's focused on memoirs. And it's a for-profit, not a nonprofit, but we're going to provide a lot of free stuff and help people get started and finish their memoirs. So we're going to host a version of National Memoir Writing Month. We're not calling it that, but the idea will be that we'll invite a lot of people in, form a community of writers, help people tell their story. Even more people, everybody has a life story. So no one can say I'm not a creative type or I don't have a story because everybody's got a life story and it's fascinating. And so, yeah, we're planning a whole bunch of different ways to support people throughout that memoir writing process. And then I have one more project. It's called the Flash Fiction Institute. And basically, so I'm really into writing the short stuff. I co-founded and run this little magazine called 100 Word Story, where every story has to be exactly 100 words. And the flash fiction has always kind of been the stepchild of academia and the writing world, even though it's really growing in popularity with the internet. And so there's no one hub to go to learn about it. And so the Flash Fiction Institute will be that kind of educational hub. So we're going to have, and so many great flash fiction authors teach as well. So yeah. So hopefully
Wow,
both of those will launch in the next few months. Yeah.
that's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
And so, Grant, what writers inspire you?
Oh my God, so many, and on so many different levels. When I have like James Salter is one of my favorite writers just for the poetry of his sentences, the rhythm. So I always just have like books of his on my shelf, and sometimes I'll just pick them up for inspiration. Uh, for years, I tried to imitate Dennis Johnson, and a lot of authors have tried to imitate Dennis Johnson. And th the thing I love about authors that kind of attract people to imitate them is that it's impossible to imitate them in the end. There's just something ineffable and so special. But I think the practice of trying to do it as a young writer like helps you develop your voice and your own sensibility, because it is like James Salter. There's things are so subtle about his sentences. You can just study them and absorb them over so long of a time in order to kind of truly know them. One thing about James Salter is he kind of used commas somewhat inappropriately. Like they didn't follow grammatical rules all the time, but he did them for the rhythms of his sentences. And when you read him, the commas aren't grammatically correct, but you appreciate the rhythms they created. But he famously got in this kind of argument with the very rigid New Yorker copy editor.
Oh,
She won every grammatical, argument that she was ever in, except she relented with him and saw his purpose and left his commas in place. Um, so yeah, there's just so many authors, Ocean
Yeah,
Vuong is a recent one who I really love. I love um, I always blank out in interviews like this.
of course, of course. It's like,
Ingrid
what's your favorite
Nunez.
movie?
Yeah, I'm like, is it Ingrid Nunez? Yeah, but yeah, Sigrid Nunez. Sigrid Nunez. I love her. She writes with such a kind of quiet intimacy, and there's nothing terribly dramatic that happens in her stories usually, but she just kind of captures the interesting small dramas of the world. Yeah, yeah.
I have had the great pleasure of seeing Grant in a couple of live events recently, and I have loved his gift of gab and ways to inspire his authors in the room. You work with writers all the time too, right? Is that right?
I do. I love that. That's my favorite thing about
Is
being a
it?
writer, actually. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do people work with you, Grant?
In
People
a
would like.
variety of ways. I mean, I teach, a lot of different places, everything from, you know, one-time workshops to a series of classes. I have a lot of coaching and editing clients, who contact me over the on my website or via my Substack. So yeah, I usually have a kind of full roster of writers who I work with individually or in classroom settings. Yeah. Or like speaking at conferences and stuff like that.
That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Grant, you wrote pep talks for writers.
Hmm.
So, what's the pep talk you personally turn to when you're feeling like really stuck or uninspired?
Hmm. Hmm. Gosh, good question. Um, some of them are like also like kind of explorations of your own creative process or how you exist in the world as a creator. So one that I think of a lot is just how boredom, like when you're bored these days, almost all of us immediately reach for our phone. Because it's funny, like I walk my dog and I'll like whip up the phone immediately and be on the phone the whole time I'm walking my dog instead of like looking at all the world around me and enjoying it and letting my mind be peaceful. And so, like the article on boredom is how, or the essay on boredom is how boredom's like this invitation of creativity. Like when we're bored, it's almost like when you're writing and you have a moment. Like I always say that creativity is a series of moments of discomfort, or that's part of it. And those moments of discomfort, they force you to think deeper or think differently. And I think boredom does the same thing. Like our minds really resist boredom. So we don't need the phone, actually. Our minds will start creating something that's interesting, through daydreaming or something. So I don't think so. The main thing for me is just a reminder not to do that quick reflex addictive
Yeah.
reach for my phone, and to live in the world so that I'm actually getting ideas, and nourishing myself and nourishing my brain so that that nourishes my creative work as well. So that's one. The other one I like a lot is it's the concluding essay, which is like, what is success? Because I think a lot of writers get hung up on the idea that they're going to write a best-selling novel that's going to be made into a movie and they're going to be famous and rich. And those things are just so unlikely. And I don't think that that's the reason to write. I mean, when I said your story matters, I really believe you need to find a deep reason to believe in your writing, and the kind of reason that will help you continue writing even when your book gets rejected, like writing, the act of writing unto itself should be meaningful and joyful. And so I think that's, so all these metrics of success, I just question them and try to encourage people not to think of them, because you never know. Also, you can't plan for that, especially in the book world.
I know that you have written some beautiful books.
Thank you.
All right, this is the
Um,
beautiful one that I
Jane's
know
holding
of,
up
and
some books for our listeners.
so yes, so all the comfort sin can provide, just filled with so much beauty, and then the art of brevity. That's just so that my brain could have the art of brevity. I need this. I
I love the way you held that up.
well, this is making me think.
all the
Jane's shaking
Well,
hands.
I love this
Oh,
cover
that's
and
good. That's
this.
good. All the
I,
comforts and control. That's great. I love the
Is
back.
that a great title?
Yeah. Who's the back picture of?
my friend Vaughn Trachtman is a wonderful photographer, and so that's part of one of her photos.
Oh, that's
But I don't know who it is of. But yeah, one of her photo
great.
subjects. Yeah,
And Jane, hold the other one up.
This is the art. This was
yeah.
this is
I,
my beacon of light. I just put this in front of my
Oh, that's
desk, like
clever. That's
because
clever.
God knows Jay needs to edit when I write. So I just everything's this is my beacon.
thank you.
So I'm again so grateful for your work, Grant, and I know that you, like you said, you're working on new projects as well.
Hmm.
But when I went to this, what was he? The man, I won't even say his name. The actor that was reading at the play reading,
Yeah.
or sorry, at the book reading recently. He was
Hmm.
reading from which book?
All the comforts it can
So
provide.
this
See,
one.
yeah.
Yes, and I had told Grant afterwards. I said I wish that we had just gone outside and listened to it by the fire and taken time with
Mm,
it, because it's so rich and it's so evocative, and I miss and I crave this kind of storytelling where the prose is so lovely. It's a rare author that can capture that for me. So Grant, I'm so grateful
thank you.
for your inspiration, not only in teaching or in sharing with your right-minded podcast, but the books that you write too are just beautiful, beautiful. Do you feel you had said something about, that you were grateful that you were writing your Substack every week
Weekly, yeah.
because it's churning it out. So for those who are processing grief or what we are, what's happening in the world right now, do you have specific exercises for people, or you just basically just go write? Do you have when the pain is big?
Yeah. It is tough. I mean, I think all writers have different responses to what's going on in the world, but I do think I remember when I was executive director of NaNoWriMo in 2016, and we had National Novel Writing Month is every November, and so many writers stopped writing that month. It was so sad, after the election, and I'm sure that happened this time as well, and I'm sure it's happening now,
Lots more
just
ice
because.
cream.
Yeah, just because there's this overload of, well, in this case, I think it's a lot of helplessness, a lot of mourning, a lot of shock. I mean, just a lot of different feelings. And I used to be one of those grit it out, just sit down, write through it types of writers, but I think people really need to take care of themselves and really kind of thoughtfully put together a strategy that works for them so that writing still holds joy and meaning, because it really is how we get through these times and how we make sense of them, or even how we escape them. I think sometimes we need to, we should not underestimate the power of escape and how that nourishes us and brings us back with more energy to do good things in the world. And so, there was a post recently that I thought was really good. My friend Isa Cato, she lost her 18-year-old daughter to a kind of random fentanyl overdose. Like somebody gave her a drug, and it was so tragic because she had just graduated from high school and just got this internship or this job on Broadway and was like living the dream.
Wow.
And then day one in New York City took this well, I'm not sure what it was, but overdosed and died. And so Issa's been grappling with that that morning. And she's been doing it on Substack. She writes a wonderful Substack about what she's going through with the grief. But she has this daily exercise of going and sitting in her daughter Bailey's room. And Issa's an artist, a visual artist, and so she does like mixed media with butterflies. So every day there's a different butterfly, and so she creates a routine or a ritual. She does other things too with like flowers and just like her presence in the room. And so I think like, like things like that, like setting up a routine, a system to write, doing something that makes it, when Issa started making these butterflies for her daughter, it's not like she's thinking I'm going to have a butterfly show next year. She's
Right.
just doing it as an act of
Yeah.
of remembrance and grieving. And so I think like sometimes I think I've been doing more of this myself. We had several, speaking of Right-Minded, the podcast, several writers who got on and who went through different types of periods like this. And like Samantha Chang called it purposeless writing or useless writing. And so sometimes I think it's good as a creator to do useless writing, just to write for writing's sake, just for the
Like
joy of it,
morning
and
pages, you
kind
know.
of like morning pages, yeah, and
Mhm.
see where it leads. And so I've been doing a lot of that as well, like just kind of exploring different thoughts. And it's amazing where they lead sometimes. Like it might feel like you're kind of meandering around aimlessly, but then you'll sort of arrive someplace. Like I just typed up, I don't know, 40 pages of notes from my writer's notebook, and I have a bunch
Mm,
of
yeah.
poems and stories and things kind of growing from that. So yeah, so I don't know. I think it's like there are a lot of things you can do, but I think it's like finding what works for you. Like one of my writing students, I just challenged her to write 200 words a day. So that's not much. That's like, maybe 15 to 20 to 25 minutes of writing. So don't underestimate those small pockets of time as
Right.
well. I always like telling the story of Toni Morrison, who was a single mom in New York City with a couple kids. And after a whole day of work and getting her kids dinner and helping them with their homework and getting them to bed and stuff, she had like 15 minutes to herself. And she used that 15 minutes to write every day. And that's how she wrote her first novel. So you can do something big in small increments. So yeah.
And I think too, Grant, what you said is really, in essence, write what you know, because then it's more. I'm not. It's more based on your motivation to write,
Hmm.
therapeutic, or you can express yourself in some way. And I know that there's always writers that I know that are fearful because of will people like it? We go back to the external rather than internal. So there's this whole
Hmm.
fight that we have when we write. And
Totally.
yet, with all of that, I do find it fascinating that you write The Art of Brevity, because I think that's the hardest. It's
Yes.
to write less than to write
Oh, it
more.
is.
And I
That's
was
There's a
why
laughing,
it's
famous
the beacon for me.
like, I mean, really? And because it really is. I mean, it's so what
there's a
is it about that for you?
Yeah, there's a famous quote. They attribute it to Mark Twain, but no one knows if he actually said this. But he said like, "I would have written it shorter if I would have only had more time." You know,
It's so
um,
True, so
true.
true.
yeah. And so writing short is something that we're generally not taught in our writing education, strangely enough, because short writing is, like you said, usually more difficult, but also often more effective. So what attracts me to it? I just kind of stumbled on the 100-word story form when I was working on this big doomed novel. I'd been working on the novel on and off for like 10 years. And the 100-word stories, they provided me, well, one, this kind of escape from the novel where I could actually finish something. And
Yeah, the
finishing
sense of
something,
completion, right?
yeah, a sense of
Huge.
completion is huge. Yeah, it fuels you creatively. And then I could also send them out to be published, and that's also fueled me creatively. But beyond that, writing in these little boxes. So the definition of flash fiction is stories under 1,000 words. So they have all lengths there. But constraints actually they hold irony because they can enhance your creativity. And so when you said it's more about editing than writing, like with a 100-word story, the first draft might be 107 words, and then you have to take out 7 words, but you end up taking out 12, then you have to add some, and you end up adding 19. So it's this whole kind of Rubik's Cube of going back and forth. But in that back and forth, you're paying intense attention to the language and the flow of sentences and what's included, because the story is told largely through hints. And so you have to allow in suggestions. And so you have to allow on the reader to kind of fill in the gaps. So you're writing the story also with a lot of omission, and that's where the creativity comes out, and the story kind of starts changing shape, the more you kind of move that Rubik's cube around. And that's what I love about it. It's partly a game, to get them to be
Yeah.
exactly 100 words. And I think they're usually better. When I first started writing them, I could not get them below like 150 words. And the person who introduced me to the forum said, you have to get them to 100. The story will be better. And there's no magic to the number 100, but it's just that intense focus on that like little box that does make it better.
And they're so cathartic too. When you can actually world build like that, it's such a important exercise for all of us to put our stories or our thoughts or imagination to paper and world build with audience if they get to read it and even to pass it on
Definitely.
the table.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming close to our end, and actually, this
Wow.
is Believe in People, and usually we ask our final question, but I'm going to turn it around. Instead of why do you believe in people, why do you believe in writing, Grant?
Good question. Well, I think writing is the most effective critical thinking tool that we have. I think when you write, you again, like you are scrutinizing words. You have to think about like not only the point you're making, but counterpoints. You're thinking about the nuance and the shadings of words and sentences and how you're making meaning in the world. So there's just that language is our main critical thinking tool. And so writing like takes you deeper and deeper into that language because writing's hard actually, and that because it's hard, it makes you think more about it. But then I think in general, just like what I said earlier about like we are storytelling creatures. That's how we make meaning of the world. And we right now, all of us are projecting some story on the world, and either the world will live up to that story or it won't. So we're creating fictions to some degree. I think we never really see the world as it is. And so, but we're by creating those fictions, we're also in control of the story we tell ourselves. And so I think the more conscious you are of the stories you tell yourself and represent in the world, I think it makes the world a better place, actually. And in the end, I mean, that's how we connect with people too, is through our stories. And so that's how the world changes. I always say, in these times where we can get really depressed on a political level. I mean, what changes politics and policy is stories. If you think back 100 years ago, the stories on bookshelves and bookstores, they were mainly written by white, fairly wealthy men. And nowadays, even though we're having all these scares with book banning and stuff, if you walk into a bookstore, you'll see a much better representation of the country. So we've come a long way. Like gay people can get married now. Maybe that's in part because of Will and Grace. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Or friends.
Or friends. Yeah, yeah.
It could be that another one
That's
too.
right. That's right. I think it's friends.
Oh,
I think
that
it's
Come on,
friends.
man.
Yeah, yeah.
Grant, thank
That's
you
funny.
so much for your time and
Thank
and the
you.
learning. I'm just going to say Grant the philosopher, because really that's what you instill in others, the
Aw,
thinking around that. So thank you.
thank you. It was lovely to
Deacons.
talk with you guys. It was so fun.
There's so many people now that are writing and getting into writing, and I don't know whether they feel they need to because there's an excitement built around it, and then they go to write and it's like, oh my God, there's a fear and a blank page, so to speak. And I think when Grant said, really write what you know, I mean, that's like ease into it that way.
I see so many, and in workshops I've worked with a lot of writers also about just because it's stuck in our bodies. And I think that if we don't get it out on page, it can really do some big damage. So especially those bigger moments, and also to reflect on your life and see all the celebration and the beauty, it helps everything when you start looking back and realizing all of that. So yeah, it's great. I am constantly inspired by Grant Faulkner's work, and so
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for introducing us, the audience, and to me, to Grant. He's just really, his work is profound. And I won't share too much, but Jane and I are looking forward to speaking to somebody else that works with Grant coming up soon. So yay.
That's perfect.
So that'll be fun. So stay tuned and please subscribe to Believe in People if you believe in what we're doing and us and all the cool guests we have. So thanks, everyone.